My sister-in-law said it at Thanksgiving dinner, right in front of everyone, with a smile on her face like she was paying me a compliment. You know, Diane, it's so sweet that you still try. That was it. That was the whole sentence. Still try. Like I was some aging runner limping toward a finish line no one was watching anymore. Like the last 12 years of my life had been one long, earnest, slightly embarrassing attempt at being relevant. My husband laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an apologetic laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from the belly, the kind that means you agree but don't want to be the one to say it first. I picked up my fork and kept eating. I didn't say anything. I never did. I need to back up because if I start with that dinner, you won't understand what it cost me to sit there quietly. You won't understand what I had already built, alone, in the margins of a life that looked from the outside like nothing much at all. My name is Diane. I'm 38 years old. For the last 11 years, I've been married to a man named Kevin, who is smart and charming and who, somewhere around year 4, stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as furniture, familiar, functional, easy to overlook. Kevin's family is old money in the way that means they don't actually have much money anymore, but still carry themselves like they do. His mother, Lorraine, wears pearls to casual dinners. His sister, Audrey, the one with the smile, married a finance guy and spends a lot of time reminding everyone about it. Family gatherings at the Harmon house always felt like auditions for a role I never quite got cast in. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My parents were a nurse and a high school shop teacher. We weren't poor, but we counted things. We knew which weeks were tight. I got a partial scholarship to Ohio State, worked 20 hours a week through college, graduated with a degree in graphic design and about $19,000 in student loans. Kevin and I met at a friend's birthday party in Columbus. He was finishing his MBA. I was 26 and working at a small branding agency, designing logos for dental offices and regional restaurant chains. He thought I was creative and different. I thought he was confident and kind. We were both partially right. We moved in together. Then we got married. Then the subtle architecture of our life together started to take shape, and I didn't notice at first how carefully it had been designed to keep me small. It wasn't dramatic. That's what I want you to understand. There was no single moment where Kevin turned to me and said, "You don't matter." It was smaller than that. It was him talking over me at dinner parties. It was him describing my work as her little design stuff to his colleagues. It was Lorraine asking every Christmas whether I'd thought about getting my real estate license, something more stable, more legible, more acceptable to people who understood what success was supposed to look like. I kept doing my little design stuff, and I kept not talking about it. Here's what they didn't know. 3 years into our marriage, I started freelancing on the side. Not because we needed the money. Kevin's salary was fine, and we lived within it. But because the agency I worked for had folded during a round of cuts, and I wasn't ready to walk back into someone else's office and start over. I'd spent 8 years executing other people's visions. I wanted to try one of my own. So I did. I started with surface pattern design, fabric prints. I licensed a few to a small textile company in North Carolina for almost nothing, just to learn the process. Then I got better. I started building a catalog, hundreds of original patterns across botanical, geometric, folk art, abstract. I set up accounts on every licensing platform I could find. I studied contracts. I took an online course on intellectual property law because I couldn't afford a lawyer at the time and I needed to understand what I was signing. Kevin knew I was freelancing. He knew in the same way you know your neighbor has a dog. You see the evidence sometimes, you're vaguely aware of it, you don't think about it much. He thought I was making a few $100s here and there. He thought it was a hobby with occasional pocket money. He thought that for 8 years. The reality is that in year 2 of freelancing, I made $34,000 from licensing alone. In year 3, $71,000. By year 6, my patent library had been licensed to manufacturers in 14 countries. a mid-sized home goods brand, the kind that sells through Target and Home Goods and 100 smaller retailers, reached out to negotiate an exclusive licensing deal for one of my collections. We signed a 3-year contract worth $280,000. I had a separate business account. I had an LLC. I had a CPA I'd found through a professional association who helped me structure everything correctly and who had, over the years, become something like a trusted advisor. I didn't hide it to be deceptive. I want to say that clearly because I've thought about it a lot since everything came apart. In the beginning, I didn't tell Kevin because I didn't want to explain a failure if it failed. Then it didn't fail. And I didn't tell him because I had started to understand something uncomfortable. The money I earned on my own felt different from any other money I'd ever had. It felt like proof of something. I was afraid that if I brought it into our shared life, it would get absorbed into the general noise of the household and stop meaning what it meant to me. And then, somewhere around year 5, I didn't tell him because I'd started to notice how he talked about me. And I understood that what I had built was the only thing entirely mine, and I wasn't ready to hand it over to someone who had already decided I was furniture. So I kept it. I kept all of it. In a savings and investment account that had, by the time of that Thanksgiving dinner, grown to just over $400,000. Still try. I replayed those words the whole drive home. Kevin drove. He had 3 glasses of wine and was in a good mood, talking about a golf trip he wanted to plan in the spring, asking whether I thought his mother seemed tired lately, whether we should offer to help more with the house. It took the whole 40-minute drive and I said in the right places and watched the highway lights blur past the window. When we got home, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table while he went upstairs. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the first time I'd ever shown Kevin a piece of my work. Really shown him. Spread the prints on the kitchen table and explained the concept, and how he'd nodded and said, "Neat," and gone back to his phone. I thought about Lorraine asking me about real estate licenses. I thought about Audrey's smile, the specific geometry of it, the way it managed to be both condescending and blameless at once. I thought about how I'd spent 12 years being quiet about everything I was capable of, because the air in that family was thin, and I'd learned, slowly, to breathe less. I went upstairs. Kevin was already asleep. I lay next to him in the dark and I thought, for the first time clearly and without flinching, I am done making myself invisible so that you can feel like the one who matters. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like something unlocking. I called my CPA, Harriet, the following Monday. Harriet is 61, originally from Memphis, and has the kind of calm that comes from having seen most of the ways a situation can go sideways. I told her I was thinking about making some changes and I wanted to understand my options. We talked for 2 hours. What I hadn't told Harriet, what I hadn't told anyone, was that 6 weeks earlier I had been approached by a brand development firm out of Atlanta. They were building a portfolio of independent surface design and illustration IP, and they were interested in acquiring a portion of my catalog outright. Not a licensing deal, an acquisition. They wanted 55% of my pattern library, the full catalog, all rights for a lump sum payment. Their opening offer was $1.1 million. I had not said yes. I had not said no. I had engaged an IP attorney, a real one, not an online course, and we had been quietly in negotiations for 4 weeks. When I told Harriet, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Diane, how long have you been sitting on this?" "A while," I said. "And Kevin doesn't know?" "No." Another pause. "What do you want to happen?" I looked out my kitchen window. The backyard needed work. It had always needed work. I'd kept meaning to hire someone and then not gotten around to it, and Kevin had never once mentioned it. "I want to finish the negotiation," I said, "and then I want to figure out what my life looks like after." The negotiation took another 3 weeks. We landed at $1.4 million for 55% of the catalog, with a retained royalty clause that would pay me a percentage on any revenue generated from my designs for the next 10 years. My attorney, a sharp woman named Petra, who I'd found through an IP law directory, walked me through every line of the term sheet. We pushed back on 3 clauses. We won 2 of them. The wire hit my account on a Thursday afternoon in February. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside the bank, and I looked at my phone for a long time. I had never seen a number like that with my name attached to it. I grew up in Dayton. My father drove a 2003 Chevy Silverado until it had 240,000 miles on it. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital during the years when money was tightest and never once complained in front of us. I thought about her. I thought about what she would say. I thought she would say, "Now what are you going to do with it?" Kevin's firm had their annual client appreciation dinner in March. It was the kind of event where spouses come, where everyone gets dressed up and stands in a ballroom at a downtown hotel and makes conversation about things they don't actually care about. I had been to 6 of these dinners. Every year I wore something appropriate, smiled at the right moments, and spent most of the evening talking to other spouses about school districts and vacation plans. This year, Kevin's managing partner brought his wife, a woman named Teresa who had done extremely well in commercial real estate and who, I had always noticed, Kevin treated with a deference he never brought home. He listened when Teresa talked. He asked follow-up questions. He credited her ideas out loud. At dinner, someone asked me what I did. A client of Kevin's, a man named Robert, the polite small-talk version of the question. Kevin answered before I could. "She does design," he said. "Freelance stuff. Keeps busy." I looked at him. He was already turning back to Robert, redirecting the conversation towards something about the fourth quarter. I picked up my wine glass. I thought about the wire transfer. I thought about Petra and Harriet and the 14 countries. I thought about still try. I set the wine glass down. "Actually," I said, "I'd just completed the sale of a portion of my design IP catalog. Licensing and acquisition, primary market was home goods and textile manufacturing." I said it the way Teresa would say it. Calm, factual, no apology in it. The table went quiet. Robert looked interested. "Oh, what kind of volume are we talking?" "The acquisition closed at $1.4 million, I said. "Retained royalty on the back end." Kevin turned and looked at me. I don't have a good word for his expression. It was the look of a man encountering a piece of furniture that has just spoken. Teresa leaned forward. "What's your catalogue built around?" And I told her. I talked about surface pattern design, about building an IP library over 8 years, about the licensing structure, about what it had taken to understand the legal side well enough to negotiate my own contracts in the early years. I talked about it the way I had never talked about it in Kevin's presence before, which is to say, I talked about it like it was real, like it was serious, like it was exactly what it was. Teresa nodded through all of it. At the end, she said, "You should talk to my friend who runs a design licensing fund. I think you'd find it interesting." "I'd love that," I said. Kevin didn't say anything, not at the table, not in the car on the way home, not when we got inside. He was quiet in the way that isn't peace, the way that's something building. It came out 3 nights later. I was in my studio. I'd converted the spare bedroom years ago. Kevin never used it, and he came to the door and stood there with his arms crossed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. It wasn't a question. I saved the file I was working on. I turned around. "Tell you what specifically?" "About the money. About all of it. We've been married for 11 years, Diane." "Yes," I said. "We have." That's not an answer. I thought about how to say it. I had thought about this conversation for months, in the abstract, without knowing exactly when it would happen. I had rehearsed versions of it in the car, in the shower, in the margins of conference calls. But when it came to it, I just said the true thing. "Because you didn't see it," I said. "Not once in 8 years did you ask about it like it was real. You called it my freelance stuff. Your mother asked me every Christmas whether I'd considered something more practical. Your sister smiled at me at Thanksgiving like I was a child who'd made something out of popsicle sticks. And I kept building. And none of you looked." He stood there. "I'm not angry at you," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not doing this to punish you. But I want you to understand something. This was mine. Every contract, every negotiation, every 2 a.m. hour, I spent learning copyright law so I didn't get taken advantage of. This was mine, and I was not going to bring it into a room where it would get called my little hobby. He left the doorway. I heard him go downstairs. I turned back to my monitor. I stayed in my studio until almost midnight. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way people might imagine. We didn't have screaming fights. We had something worse, long, careful conversations where everything was measured and honest and insufficient. Kevin said he hadn't realized. Kevin said he wished I'd told him. Kevin said he was proud of me, and I believed that he meant it, and I also understood that it was too late for proud to be the point. We went to a couples therapist for 6 weeks. She was good. She helped Kevin articulate things he hadn't been able to say, and she helped me understand that what I had done, keeping my work hidden for years, had its own costs, even if I'd had reasons. She didn't frame it as blame. She framed it as a pattern that 2 people had built together, each contributing to the shape of it. She was right. I thought about that a lot. But the shape of it had also been real. The invisibility had been real. Still try had been real. By the time May came, Kevin and I had agreed to separate. It was mutual in the technical sense of the word. We both understood by then that we had grown into versions of ourselves that didn't fit together anymore. He was not a villain. He was a man who had failed to look for too long, and I was a woman who had let herself disappear into the looking away until I didn't. Our attorneys handled everything. Kevin had no legal claim to my business. It was an LLC formed before our marriage, with assets that had remained entirely separate throughout. Harriet had made sure of that years ago in the careful way she did everything. We divided the shared accounts, the house, we sold it, split the equity, and the process was long and uncomfortable and mostly civil. I live in a rented house now, in a neighborhood with mature trees and a coffee shop 2 blocks away that I walk to most mornings. My studio takes up the second bedroom the same way it always has. I work the same hours I always worked. The retained royalty payments come in quarterly. Teresa's friend introduced me to 2 people who led to 2 others, and I've spent the last several months in conversations about what I want to do next with the catalogue, whether to build, to sell the remaining 45%, to license more aggressively, to do something entirely different. I don't know yet. I'm learning to be comfortable with not knowing. Audrey called me in July. I was surprised. We had never spoken much, even during the marriage. She said she'd heard through Lorraine that the divorce had been finalized and she wanted to check in. I wasn't sure what she wanted from the call, so I was polite and brief. Before we hung up, she said, "I didn't know about your work. I want you to know I didn't know." I thought about saying, yes, that's the point. I thought about saying, either did he. Instead, I said, I know you didn't. I didn't make it easy to know. That's the truest thing I could give her. There's a line I keep coming back to, something my therapist said during one of our last sessions. She said that people learn early which version of themselves gets accepted in a room, and they lead with that version until they forget they have others. I forgot for a long time. Maybe not forget, that's not quite right. I set it aside, I tucked it into a separate account, let it accrue quietly, told myself I was being strategic when I was also, partly, being afraid. Afraid that if I showed them everything, they still wouldn't look. The dinner party in the video, the elegant reveal, the speechless husband, the public moment of recognition, that's one way the story could have gone. I think about that version sometimes, whether it would have felt good, whether it would have been worth it. What I chose instead was smaller and stranger. I said one true thing at a dinner table, in a normal voice, without performance. I said it because something in me had stopped being able to not say it. And then I let the pieces fall, however they were going to fall. It wasn't triumphant. It was just real. And real, I've learned, turns out to be the thing I was protecting all along. Not the money, not the catalogue, not the numbers. Just the evidence that I had existed, fully, the whole time, even when no one was watching. Especially then. I used to think the hardest part was building something real while no one believed it was real. Now I think the harder part was admitting that I'd helped create the conditions for my own invisibility. Not on purpose, not out of weakness exactly. But I had learned, the way most people learn things, gradually through repetition, that certain rooms don't have space for all of you. And instead of finding different rooms, I got smaller. I brought less of myself to the table. I told myself it was strategy when sometimes it was just fear. What I know now is that character, the real kind, not the kind you perform, gets built in the quiet. It gets built in the years when no one is watching, when there's no audience and no reward and no guarantee that any of it will matter. I spent 8 years learning copyright law at midnight, rewriting licensing contracts, turning down bad deals because I'd done the work to know they were bad. That was not glamorous. It was just the accumulation of choices made honestly, over time without applause. Harriet used to say, "A number on a page doesn't lie." She meant it about financials, but I've come to think it applies more broadly. The truth of what you've done, the actual record of it, doesn't care whether anyone acknowledged it while you were doing it. It exists anyway. And eventually, in one way or another, it becomes visible. That's the part I had wrong for a long time. I thought invisibility was something being done to me. I thought if the people around me had just looked harder, paid more attention, asked better questions, I would have felt seen. But the real cost of staying quiet wasn't what it did to my reputation in Kevin's family. It was what it did to me, the slow erosion of my own sense of what I was worth, until I needed a $1.4 million wire transfer to remind myself that I had built something true. The dinner at the hotel, the moment I said the number out loud in a normal voice, that wasn't about proving anything to Kevin. I understand that now more clearly than I did then. It was about stopping the performance of being less. That performance had run for years, and I was the one who kept it going, and I was the one who finally chose to let the curtain drop. I don't think Kevin was a villain. I don't think Audrey was cruel, not really. People reflect back to us what we show them, and I had spent a long time showing them someone who didn't take up much space. The cause and the effect were connected. When I changed what I was willing to show, everything around me had to reorganize itself. What I want anyone to take from this, if there's something to take, is that the work matters before the recognition. The integrity of what you're building, the discipline to keep building it honestly, the refusal to stop even when no one is paying attention. Those things compound. They compound quietly and without fanfare, and then one day the number on the page doesn't lie, and you remember that you are the one who put it there. I live alone now, in a house with a studio and trees out the window and a coffee shop 2 blocks away. I walk there most mornings. I take my time. I don't make myself smaller to fit through the door. That took a while to learn. I'm still learning it, but I think that might be the whole point.